Buonasera a tutti voi, partecipanti da ogni parte.
Hello and good evening to all attendees from all over the world. We meet up again here from those who have been following us today and who followed us yesterday. Welcome to all new attendees. My name is Valentina Falcioni. I'm a member of the EcoOne Commission, and we are happy to welcome you here at the second day of the International Congress EcoOne 2020. We're very happy about how things started up yesterday and the success of the working sessions we had yesterday and this morning. We now begin our afternoon of this second day of our proceedings. Some technical notes. We are in Rome. This is where our control room is, and we've launched our international streaming channels in Italian, English, Spanish, and Hungarian, as well as Portuguese. For every language, there is a YouTube channel which we are following, and for this reason we give you the opportunity to interact with our guests and our speakers. Those who have enrolled and are following through Zoom need to set up their Zoom platform with the very latest version. This will give you the opportunity to choose the language, whether it's a computer or a mobile phone. Those who are in Zoom can also use the chat section for technical questions and questions for the speakers and technical questions. You do not need to indicate that you are present. This is automatically recorded. Everybody is muted at the moment, and the Congress is recorded and will remain online on our website and on the YouTube channels. I hope audio works well for everyone, that recording and translation is correctly set up. In your case, you are listening to the English translation, and we open our second afternoon. Good afternoon, Pierluigi Sassi, and I represent Birthday Italia, an organization that every day we organize Earth Day with the Focolare movement. And thank you, EcoOne, Luca Fiorani, for thinking about me all the time at these important milestones. This is 5 years from the publication of this extraordinary encyclical letter, Laudato Si, which had the advantage of creating a deep cultural change in the collective conscience. And it indicated the way towards an ecological conversion, which is very, very necessary in order to fight climate disasters, which are close to irreversible at this point. This is the relationship. We're going to talk about the relationship between ecology and society, and this will be offered to us as a perspective by Luca Mercalli, a professor, climatologist, well-known face on our scientific news, and a deep expert on mountain climates. Despite its enormous dimensions, the mountains are one of the most alpine landscapes, are one of the most fragile on our planet. And he was interviewed as president of the Italian Meteorological Society, interviewed by Valentina Falcioni. Hello, Professor Mercalli. Thank you for having accepted our invitation. And with this recording, you will introduce to us the third session of our Congress, A New Way Towards Integral Ecology. So in this session in particular, we will talk about ecology and society. What do you mean by ecology? And when does it come into play or interfere with citizens and society? Hello, everyone. Ecology is our basis for survival. We should have understood, and science is telling us, that without an environment that works, we are not able to live. And notwithstanding having a good life, It is that network of relationships amongst all living beings of this planet, which relate to climate, the availability of water, the way our oceans are managed, and so on, in order to allow us, on the one hand, to have raw materials, meaning that we all need to eat, and this comes from food comes from the community of living species. We need raw materials, timber, minerals. Minerals are not living, but when we extract minerals, we touch areas where there is a life, nearly always. They could be a forest, or we use inanimated objects, and this contemplates a threat for biodiversity. This is the entirety of the way that thing we call nature functions, which on the one hand allows us to satisfy our fundamental needs, that is air and water, without which we could not live, and on the other, to have a satisfying life. If we overdo it, if we become too greedy, if we devastate the land we have available, we destroy ecological relationships with the rest of living beings, and then this obviously has an impact on us. If you add climate change and pollution, this deterioration was very difficult, will be difficult for the younger generations. This is an interesting network, especially a collection on the way down from the smallest molecules to the largest hurricanes, and this has an impact on areas which are very vulnerable. Yes, we could consider air and water as two connected aspects. We need water to live in the right quantity. If there's not enough, there'll be a drought, and if it's too much, we'll have a flood. Water also needs to be considered in its chemical qualities, because we need clean water, whereas water is becoming more and more polluted. Plastic soup, which is eaten up by the fish, and then we find it back in our dishes when we have dinner. But there are other dangerous, more dangerous things in water. In Italy, near the Vicenza region, we have toxic compounds which have permanently polluted the water tables. As far as air is concerned, it is the climate which lives, which envelops us and enables us to live in a hospitable climate. If we alter it, it won't be so hospitable anymore. Exactly, and therefore this implies an anthropic action in this Anthropocene era, which is connected with ecology. So there are positive and negative effects of human activity. There are quite a few positive effects. If we look at it from the point of view of the planet, it's very hard to find any positive influence on humanity, on nature. Human beings have always used nature, exploited nature. So in certain conditions, this has been done with a good balance. Think about certain alpine environments or countrified environments. Until the 19th century, they have been a great example of balance. The forest in the Dolomites in Italy, for example, we have used a forestry resource without depleting it through some rules. And these forestry rules were born in the Middle Ages, but after the Second World War, the great acceleration due to the increase of the population, which is close to 8 billion people today, has provoked in the uninhabited glaciers in the poles is our pollution, is our footprint. So our influence travels even to these uninhabited places. So Anthropocene is no longer sustainable, and certainly not long-term sustainable. We need to recognize the fact that the Earth has limitations, and our growth, both in terms of population and technological needs, cannot be infinite. The economy cannot grow infinitely in a finite planet. So circular economy, sustainable development, and degrowth, serene degrowth. These are the questions we have as to how human beings relate to nature. This is perhaps what our participants are thinking, the people who are following you. Do you have anything to say to everyone who is following us and our speakers? We need to utilize all the knowledge we have, all the good part, the innovative part of this biped being on the planet. On the one hand, we devastated nature, but on the other, we have acquired awareness of ourselves and of the world and of the universe. This is a great success, but this now needs to bear fruit in order to save ourselves. All scientific and human knowledge, on the one hand, hard science based on mathematics and physics, which study the way the world functions, and human sciences, anthropology, sociology, psychology, social psychology, and economics, need to understand that we are in front of this challenge. It's the first time that humanity finds itself at a place where they fear that their very own destiny will be negative due to our own fault. And if we manage to put all this knowledge together, perhaps we can make an evolutionary thrust forward towards a sustainable development where our relationship with nature is harmonious. If we do not do this, there is a risk of not surviving for long, and we will pay for our mistakes. Thank you. This is the effort we try to do with our Congress. So thank you once again for your presence. Thank you, and I wish you profitable proceedings. Very effective. Luca Mercalli, a great friend of EcoOne and Earth Day. Ecology and Society. This these two words which have intensified thanks to this extraordinary encyclical letter of Pope Francis, which happened at a time where the complexity of our social system had taken away, had hindered the light from coming through. It was a dark time, 2015, when we found ourselves at the end of an agenda of the United Nations where the 8 objectives of the millennium had been betrayed throughout those 15 years in most of the country and most of the planet, and when 20 conferences on climate had never given a unanimous agreement allowing to undertake the route of sustainable development, making climate change a dramatic threat which is visible to all. In this context, the Laudato Si encyclical letter has supplied a light which has truly created consensus and unanimity at a global level, which has allowed the definition of 17 sustainable development goals, which has linked economics with ecology and also reaching the first agreement on climate. This turning point in history is the result of complexity, and Professor Alberto Felice De Toni is going to speak to us about complexity from Professor of Udine University, where he was also Dean, and he is an authority in terms of the theme of complexity and innovation. He will highlight new perspectives, new perceptions of reality which come about today, and new models of citizenships for the citizens of the world and of enterprises. Professor. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm very honored to be here with you today and to be able to contribute in a perspective control room to send these, to display these, please. I hope you can see them. Very good. So thank you also Pierluigi Sassi for his coordination, and I will try in 15 minutes. So at 3:30 I would like to end my contribution. So I would like to talk about complexity as an interpretative key of our world. This is the symbol of our meeting. So first of all, complexity is a relatively recent discovery, because in practice the concept was explained to us by a physicist Anderson in 1928 and Nobel laureate in 1977, who in 1972 wrote an article called "More is Different," which is now considered by all scholars a manifesto of the science of complexity. What does he write in this article then? He says that the arrow of science has always gone to the infinitely small in order to explain the infinitely large, but at a certain point we realized that we were not able, when we returned upwards, the scale effects didn't allow us to understand phenomena. So in practice, science has always used the analytic method of Descartes. So you separate the problem into sections, and then you make a synthesis at the end. You put everything back together again, and this allows us to understand the phenomenon. But Anderson says that when we reduce the problem into portions, if these portions have a negligible interaction, then it works. But if they have a which is interaction. Just an example so everybody can understand. Let's consider water, H2O. At a room temperature, it's liquid, but its components, hydrogen and oxygen, are gases at room temperature. So liquid does not belong to parts, but to the interaction. This is a very trivial example. There may be many more. Color, for example. Here's another one. The elementary particle do not have colors, but when they are inside an atom, then it absorbs different frequencies. So color appears when there is interaction. Color is another example of emerging property, such as the liquid property, but also friction. Friction is an emerging property because elementary particles are conservative in terms of force, but friction happens when there are some aggregates of material which, when one material is touching another, will generate friction. So what is the concept of complexity? Complexity substantially says that these are particles. They can be atoms, they could be people, they could be units, they could be states. It doesn't matter. When we have an interaction, we have the generation in an emerging way of a property which is considered self-organized. So in practice, the emergency process and result is self-organization. In practice, in this article, Anderson says that this emergency in all its infinite variety is the most fascinating mystery of science. In practice, the thesis is that a phenomenon is complex when it's the result of interaction. So we've already seen water, color, and friction as example of this emerging quality. This is electronic microscope picture of water which you boil when you cook pasta. These are called Benard particles, and this is water which is going up and down as though it were into an hexagonal tube. Why is it hexagonal? Well, look at this. This is another example. This is Northern Ireland, and this has become also an area which is safeguarded by United Nations, and this is called the giant causeway, and this Marcos de Soto has discovered this, and he has studied this and explained that when the ascending currents of lava became cold and cooled the water of the ocean, then this is what happens. It's basically a photograph of boiling water, and they look like the trace of a giant, but these are the particles of Benard, which are generated by red hot lava. The same reason why bees do hexagons. Why don't they just do a triangle, but they do a hexagon? This because it's the only three. It's the best way to create a shape, because with the same area they have the lowest perimeter, so they save space by doing this.
But this process is also valid for the world of biology. For example, one neuron is not a thinking brain, whereas many neurons can think. So thinking is the emergent property due to the interaction of millions of neurons in our brain. There's another very beautiful example of emergence. I found it in this TED, and you have the reference. Stephen Strogatz was a mathematician of the Cornell University, and he studied the reason why, for example, birds and fishes in schools have many different behaviors. I don't know whether you've seen that birds in group have very beautiful behaviors to be seen. Why do they behave like that? Because they increase their probability of survival. Let me explain the mechanism. Strogatz says 4 rules applied. The first rule is that the individual is aware only of those next to them. Every individual gets aligned in the mean direction, and individuals keep the distance, the same distance as the length of their body. And this is true of fishes and birds. So what we have is all these beautiful flock coming from a bottom-up approach. So you have very beautiful shapes, and schools of fish can be hysterical. What is the deep meaning of such a behavior? When a predator comes, the first fish applies rule number 4, and all the others number 2. So they are all able to save themselves, to escape. So we have that starting off from simple rules, we have complex behaviors. So to be short, from simple rules, we have complex behaviors, and these are the source of survival. So to be very short, the complexity of flying is a form of survival. And here we have a very interesting game. We've seen that the complexity of flying is a source of survival for birds. But for falcons, this complexity of flying can be a threat because it runs the risk of no longer finding food. So we have that complexity is clear for those generating it, and a dark side for those subjected to it. I don't know whether you're able to see flies at sunset. Why do they use a discontinuous behavior? Once again, because they understand that the frog understands trigonometry and would eat all of them. So discontinuous flying is yet another system to improve their probability of survival. What does the frog do? It has viscous saliva, sticky saliva, and flies defend themselves. So there's a whole behavior process of co-evolution, and the complexity of responses gets higher and higher. Complexity can be ambiguous. It's friendly if it's generated. It's an enemy if it's adaptation. So men and organizations are complexity agents when they launch, for example, a new product. So complexity is always on the increase. So we need to understand complexity is not a stable phenomenon, but the competition of evolution increases complexity even more. And so on this matrix, you can see the clear side of complexity, the fly, and the dark side, which is represented by the frog. So you have action and the reaction. So everybody needs to get adapted to complexity. But also in the social world, there's emergency. No councillor has ever designed a factory or a power plant. So, as you can see, in this case, you have men and enterprises bringing about a district. And there are two major phenomena, a positive retraction and cooperation and competition. Positive retraction is the so-called circularity. For example, the keypad you use, it's called QWERTY because the six first keys are Q, W, E, R, T, Y. Well, if we ask 100 people why keys are organized like that, most of them would answer because the keypad needs to be a keypad allowing people to type quickly. So it's due to ergonomics. But the country was true when it was designed. After 150 years, we are still in the vicious circle of QWERTY because we've been stopped at this vicious circle. So complexity is part of the biological system. Now, the second great feature of emerging systems is the presence of competition and cooperation in an organization. People do cooperate and compete, as is the case of a district. And here you can see this very beautiful scene of this movie that was awarded the Nobel Prize. It's the dilemma of the prisoner. So the idea being that cooperation pays more than competition in this fight for survival. And so what I do mean is that cooperation is more powerful as a weapon than competition. And so here we can understand that complicated makes things complicated, whereas complex is based on a system-like approach. So we need to understand not only the variables x, y, but have equations describing relations. So, for example, an engine, you can dismantle and remount it. For a living being, you cannot dismantle it, or if you do so, you cannot remount it because life is another emerging element, so it does not belong to the components. So complex systems need to be understood as a whole, and so they should not be dismantled in their parts. So living organisms, living systems, or complex systems, every organization, every unit is a complex organism, as is language. So simple problems have linear relations, and they're very few with an approach, whereas complicated problems may be solved using an analytic approach, but complex problems are not based on linearity, so there's emergence, and for chaotic problems, we do not have any solution. So let me share with you this. Complex systems are not only made up of many diverse elements with nonlinear connections, but they evolve over time, as is the case of species. So all organizations are complex systems, and they change over time. Now, by way of conclusion, I'd like to say that we have three major classes of emergence. We have emergence of matter. Matter was originated out of the Big Bang, and we don't understand why matter is black and energy is black. Then we have the emergence of life. This is a mystery because we have 7 different theories, but how life can be brought about by inanimate matter. And then we have the self-conscious emergency. We don't know how self-conscious can stem from matter. And then we have 3 different classes of evolution. We know that the cosmos is always evolving. We have physical evolution based on Einstein, then Darwinian biological evolution, but we have also social and cultural evolution, because Lamarck understood well before Einstein that evolution was always in a process of development. Darwin explained this mechanism very well. Then selection takes place ex post. So we have an evolution from a system from disorganized to organized complexity. Then we have the physical world, which is respectful of principles. So once we have the rule, it is understood once and forever. Then there's the biological world, where the behaviors are closely related, as is and are encapsulated in the DNA. So a behavior is a behavior that stems from finalizing a survival, whereas in the third world we have freedom of choice, so free will. And what does that mean? If behaviors are preset by rules in the first world, in the third part there's free choice, and so the world of possibility is huge. So complexity of the social world is higher than the complexity in the physical world. Now, you have the emergence of matter based on Einstein for the physical world, disorganized complexity. In the biological world, there's a Darwinian theory based on instinct, and the social world, it's emergence and self-conscience. It's based on Lamarck, and there's free will, freedom of choice. And let me conclude by saying, how can we tackle complexity in this world of today? I cannot launch it, but please watch this video by Ernesto Illy. And by way of conclusion, I share the message of this. He says, complexity is mother to liberty, is mother to responsibility, and also mother to creativity, because ideas stem from the encounter of things belonging to different frameworks, but it's also mother to uncertainty. If nature is complex, we need to understand whether there's a way of reducing this unforeseeableness. Is there a way to, in chaos, in a chaotic system, determinism can make order? If I put clues, I can have a chaotic system. If I take a magnet and I put it under a paper, all the keys get orientated, so the magnet is the tractor. What is the tractor that can put order in the complexity of human relations? It's love. If men love one another, this tractor makes the world less complex, more foreseeable, and gives the sense of the taste of life and of pleasure. Thank you very much. We liked this presentation very much. It's a theory about complexity. As a matter of fact, I have to say that I've always seen sustainability and commitment towards the environment as a sort of heterogenesis of the goals. And this is deepened by Professor Pietro Ramellini, a professor at the Pontifical University Regina Apostolorum. Is a doctor in biology and natural sciences, but is truly an expert of social ethicism. Over to you, Professor. Sì, buon pomeriggio.
For the concept of integral ecology. In this talk, I would like to elucidate a possible meaning for this term through a reflection on its three components: oikos, logos, and integrality. At first sight, the concept of integral ecology sounds captivating. It suggests a holistic sensibility towards the environment. Yet, on second thought, some knots must be untied. Briefly, the problem is whether ecology may be integral, or if, on the contrary, linking the name ecology with the adjective integral generates a contradiction. Now, the word integral refers to some totality. Most of those who speak of the integrality of something have in mind the Greek concept of holon, as the current verbiage of holisms testifies. Accordingly, integral ecology should refer to holon. But is this possible? From the etymological viewpoint, the word ecology comes from the Greek roots oikos and logos. Thus, it is the rational and in particular the scientific study of our house, that is the environment. But human experience is far larger than science, which is just a sector of a human experience. Even if we enlarge logos to include all rational thinking, human experience reaches well beyond the rationality. To quote Pascal, the heart knows reasons that the reason does not know. So an integral approach cannot be reduced to mere logos. As to Oikos, this word is usually endowed with a feeling of comfort and harmony. In English, Oikos refers more to home than to house. Now, the idea that the environment is a secure place is a form of romanticism and ironism. In fact, in really wild places, human life is in constant danger. So to say that the environment is a home is a naive way of speaking. In other words, houses were established primarily as an a nest is a place safer than the world out there. The human house is nothing else than the enhancement of this phenomenon, a separate environment controlled by its inhabitants, in short, domesticated from the Latin word domus, which means house. On the contrary, the wider environment is a place whose dynamics are uncontrollable and indifferent to our fate. Its indomitable power, largely superior to all human resistance, is apparent in disasters and pandemics. It is true that the human impact on the global environment has become increasingly influential over time. Yet, for a long time to come, the environment will remain a challenging place. Sure, someone could claim that the environment will become in the future a comfortable home through our hard human labor. Yet, are we sure that to completely domesticate all environments would be a sound policy? Is it not better to leave some, or indeed many, places free to follow their own dynamics? So the metaphor of the environment as a home has little to do with an integral experience of the actual environment. Consequently, either we revise the concept of ecology, or we must dispose of the concept of integrality. That is, there seems to be a mutual incompatibility between integral on one side and the oikos and logos on the other side. But is it so? Could we not find a way to recover some accord between these terms? Let us explore. The situation of man in the environment cannot be accounted for purely by logos, that is, thought and intellection. Rather, it is more of a praxis, an interaction, a practice with the environment. And here again, human praxis cannot be but partial, never integral. Nobody can actualize all possible interactions with the environment. As Sufi master Rumi told in a famous parable, we are like people in darkness who try to grasp the shape of an elephant from their partial viewpoint and inevitably fail. Is there a way out of this dead end? The fact is that the term integrality must be disambiguated. In the previous sense of all possible human experiences, integrality is simply unattainable. Actually, the human exploration of the existential space is partial, a path among innumerable others, an immersion into them. There is no holon, there is always a beyond. But this opens a door. That is, we can re-signify integrality as openness to the reality, as a feeling of immersion within reality, involving a sense of limit and creatureliness. Thus, we come to our first conclusion. Integral ecology has to do with the human praxis immersed in reality, open to reality, and part of the reality. But let us enlarge even more our view. Human existence is not just praxis. It is too rich to be conveyed simply by praxis.